Salam and peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning together? There is one field called phi, spelled Phi. Phi is the holophase, a cyclic rhythm defined at every point in the universe. Its first derivatives give three simultaneous echoes: time, which we call omega, spelled Omega, space, which we call k, and motion, which we call v, built from both omega and k. Above them, higher derivatives form a branching tree that in principle goes on forever. Every law of nature is a pattern in this tree of derivatives of phi. Today, we zoom into just one branch of that tree. In part 11, we sat with phi itself, the silent root. In part 12, we met omega as the local pulse of time. In part 13, we met k as the weave of space, the way phi changes from place to place. Now, in part 14 of episode 6, we meet one of the most important, but also one of the easiest to misunderstand, letters in the alphabet of reality. This letter is called d phi, spoken as d phi. Its job is simple to say. d phi tells us how phi changes when we move through time and space together. The first version of this part that I recorded was quite abstract. It was like showing you a beautiful mountain only from a plane high above the clouds. You could sense the shape, but you could not feel the stones under your feet. In this second version, we are going to walk on the mountain. We will keep the same scientific idea, but we will live inside it, with everyday pictures, simple stories, and concrete experiences, so that any person at any education level can follow. Let us start with the question that d phi really answers. Imagine you're going from your bedroom to your kitchen in the morning. While you walk, two things are happening at once. First, time is passing. Your heart is beating, thoughts are drifting, your phone clock is ticking. Second, your position is changing. You're moving from one room to another, from carpet to tiles, from dark to light. d phi is the way the holophase language talks about what changes in the underlying pattern of reality along that actual path you just walked. It is that simple. d phi is change along your path. To understand this properly, we need to remember omega and k in the simplest possible way. Omega, the time echo, answers the question: if I stay in one place and only let time pass, how fast does phi turn here? You can imagine a tiny invisible clock hand at that point, spinning at some rate. That rate is omega. K, the space echo, answers a different question. If I freeze time and walk through space, how quickly does phi change from place to place? You can imagine looking at many nearby points at the same instant and comparing their invisible clock hands. How much they differ per meter is what k tells you. So omega says, how fast does phi change as time moves forward at this spot? And k says, how fast does phi change as I step through space at this instant? Now, notice something. Nobody lives life by only doing one of these. You're never just sitting in a frozen position while time passes forever, and you are never teleporting through space without time flowing. You always move through time and space together. You live in space-time, even if you never use that word. This is where d phi belongs. It is the way we talk about how phi changes along the real motion you actually take. Let us bring in a very simple picture. Walking past a series of lamps that slowly change their brightness. Imagine a long hallway with lamps on the ceiling. Each lamp can slowly brighten and dim over time, and the brightness also varies along the hallway. At some places, the lamps are usually brighter, at others, usually dimmer. If you stand still under one lamp, you only see the brightness changing in time. Maybe it slowly brightens, then slowly dims. That is like omega, change in time at one spot. If you freeze the whole scene at one instant, like pausing a video, and then imagine walking along the hallway without letting time move, you would see that brightness changes with position. Some lamps are brighter, some are dimmer. That is like K, change in space at one moment. Now imagine the real situation. You are actually walking down the hallway while the lamps are also changing with time. What you experience as you walk is a combination of those two changes. Maybe each step takes you into a slightly brighter region, while at the same time, the whole set of lamps is slowly dimming. The net change in brightness that you see from second to second comes from both effects together. d phi is exactly this kind of combined change, but for phi, the phase field of the universe. The scientific papers on Zenodo write this in a compact way. They say something like d phi equals omega multiplied by a tiny step in time minus k multiplied by a tiny step in space. For an audio listener, you do not need to carry the formula. You can remember one simple sentence. d phi tells you how phi changes when you move a little in time and a little in space together. Let us slow this down even more with a very ordinary example. Checking the weather on your phone while you travel by bus. Imagine the temperature is our field instead of phi, just as an analogy. Temperature changes in time. Mornings are cold, afternoons are warm. Temperature changes in space. The top of a hill might be cooler than the valley. If you sit still on your balcony and watch the thermometer, you are seeing change in time at one place. That is like omega. If you could magically freeze time and then check the thermometer at many places at once, you would see change in space at one moment. That is like K. Now imagine you are on a bus that drives from the valley up to the hill while the day is warming up. As you ride, the temperature your body feels is changing because of two things. Time is passing and your location is rising. Maybe the air would have warmed by 2 degrees just because of time, but it also drops by 3 degrees because you climbed higher. Your net experience change is a blend of both. If you wanted to predict exactly how your temperature reading would change along the bus ride, you would need to combine the time change and the space change. That combination is a little glimpse of what d phi does for the phase field. You can think omega is like how fast does the weather change at one place if I wait here. K is like how fast does the weather change if I step north or south. And d phi is like how fast does the weather change along the actual route I'm traveling. Now, why is this letter d phi worth a whole episode part? Because d phi is the first place in the Holophase language where we stop talking about time and space separately and start talking about them together in a single unified way. It is the first truly space-time letter of the alphabet. Once you have d phi, you can begin to talk about paths, about natural motions, about how reality chooses certain ways of evolving instead of others. Think about driving with a navigation app. The app has a map of the city. That is like the spatial pattern, the case story. It may also know about traffic changing over time. That is like the omega story. But what the app really cares about for you is the route, the specific path you will actually take in space and time. It tells you, if you live now, follow this road, turn there, and arrive then, this is what you will experience. That route is where time and space are combined. d phi plays a similar role for the phase field. It is the way the field asks, along this possible route through the universe, how do my values change? This is not just a philosophy. In the rigorous mathematics of the Holophase model, d phi appears inside the rules that pick out which paths are physically realized. When we say that light bends around a star, or that a free object tends to move in a straight line until acted on, or that waves interfere and create patterns, underneath those familiar statements, there is a phase story. That phase story involves d-phi. Let us bring in another very simple image. Lines on a map. Imagine you are looking at a topographic map, a map that shows the height of the land with contour lines. Each line on the map connects points of equal height. If you walk along one contour line, you are always at the same altitude. Even though you are moving in space, your height is not changing. If you walk up the mountain, crossing contour lines, your height increases. If you walk down, it decreases. Now replace height with phase, phi, and replace contour line with path of constant phase. Along a path of constant phase, d phi is 0. You are moving through space and time in such a way that the underlying phase value that you are sitting on does not change. Along other paths, d phi is not 0. You are crossing phase contour lines. How fast you cross them and in which direction is basically what d phi is telling you. This map picture is powerful for intuition. On a mountain map, gradient arrows show you the direction of steepest increase of height. In the holophase language, k is like the spatial gradient arrow for phi. Omega tells you how the height would change if the whole mountain were slowly rising or sinking with time. D phi tells you what happens to your personal height as you walk along a particular path, while the mountain is maybe also moving up and down. Now let us talk honestly about falsifiability, because without that, this would stay at the level of metaphor. The holophase model makes a sharp claim. Many of the rules we already know in physics, rules about how light travels, how particles move, how waves spread, can be rewritten entirely in terms of phi, omega k, and d phi. That means that there should be a way to take a known experiment, express it in the holophase language, and get the same predicted results. If we cannot do that, the model fails. For example, physics tells us that if you send a light beam past the sun, it bends by a very specific angle. This has been measured. In the holophase picture, we say there is a phase field phi in the region around the sun. From that field, we can compute omega and k, and then d phi along different possible light paths. The claim is that the actual path light takes is special with respect to d phi. Maybe it follows paths that keep some tally built from d phi as small as possible, or that keep phase relationships consistent. These details live in the mathematical papers, not in this audio. But the point is, if we cannot find any reasonable phi and d phi that reproduce the bending that we see, then the holophase model is wrong, or at least incomplete. On the other hand, if we can do this not just for one example, but for many, then the model gains credibility. The holophase papers on Zenodo are not poetry. They contain long, detailed derivations and checks of exactly this type. The audio series you're listening to is the gentle, human-facing layer on top of that structure. You might say, this still feels very far from my daily life. So let us bring d phi right into your living room. Imagine you're watching a video on your phone while slowly walking across your house. The video itself has its own time story. As seconds pass, frames change, the plot moves forward. That is like omega for the video, change in time. The different rooms of your house have their own space story. Brightness, colors, sounds, smells. That is like K for your environment, change in space. Now, what you actually experience is not the video alone and not the room alone. It is the combination. The video changing in time while the room around you changes as you walk. Maybe you start the video in your kitchen, then you are in the hallway, then in your bedroom. The soundtrack of your walk is a blend of the video's timeline and the house's spatial layout. d phi is the way holophase talks about this kind of blended change, Not for a movie and a house, but for the fundamental phase of the universe and your path through it. Another everyday image. A treadmill with a TV in front of it. You are walking on the treadmill. The speed of the treadmill is your motion through space. The TV program is moving through its own time. If you slow down the treadmill, your spatial journey slows, but the TV keeps running. If you pause the TV, the images freeze, but you keep walking. But your real experience is both together, your body's motion and the TV's storyline. Again, d phi is this kind of combined change, expressed in the language of phi. For audio, it helps to have a single guiding phrase. So here is the simplest phrase I can offer you. d phi is how fast the underlying pattern of reality changes along the path you personally take. That is it. Every more complicated sentence is just a refinement of this. Now, you might wonder, how can something so apparently simple be scientifically deep? The depth comes from what we do with this idea. Once you can measure or calculate d phi along different possible paths, you can start asking which paths have special properties. In mathematics and physics, there is a very powerful principle that appears again and again. Many systems follow paths that make some quantity as small or as large as possible. Light takes the path of least time. A stretched string vibrates in shapes that minimize its stored tally for the given constraints. Fluids often take routes that balance different tallies. In the Holophase model, many of these least something rules are rewritten as least or special patterns of tallies built from derivatives of phi, including d phi. That is why d phi is so central. It is not the end of the story, but it is one of the first steps that lets us even write those tallies down. This also gives us another clear way to test the theory. If we can take a situation where we already know that nature follows a least something rule, like the path of a light ray or the shape of a soap film, and successfully rewrite that rule entirely in terms of phi and d phi tallies, and if that rewrite makes new, testable predictions in slightly different setups, then Holophase is doing real scientific work. If we try and fail, then the theory is in trouble. Let me reassure you of something important. You are not expected to do these calculations. That is my job, and the job of any physicist who decides to engage seriously with the Holophase framework. Your role as a listener is different. Your role is to build an intuitive feel for what these symbols mean, so that when you hear phi, omega, k, d phi, v, you're not hearing magic words, but familiar characters in a story. By the end of Book 2 of Episode 6, the goal is that you feel phi as the silent background angle, omega as the local ticking rate of time, k as the local weave of space, d phi as change along your actual motion, and v as the special motion that rides the pattern. If those 5 letters become alive for you, the rest of the Holophase language will feel much less mysterious. So let us quickly gather the images we used for d phi in this simplified version. We had the lamps in the hallway, brightness changing in time and space as you walk. We had the bus climbing the hill while the weather warms. We had the contour lines on a map and paths of constant height. We had the video on your phone while you walk around the house. We had the treadmill and the TV. All of them are ways of saying one thing. There are patterns that change in time and vary in space, and what you actually see and feel depends on the path you take through that combined pattern. d phi is the Holophase way of writing that combined change for the most fundamental pattern of all, the phase field of reality. Before we close, I want to spend more time with one especially simple image, because if you really feel this image, you will feel d phi. Picture an airport with those moving walkways. You know them, the flat conveyor belts that carry you forward while you also walk. There are 2 speeds in the story. One is the speed of the belt itself. The other is your walking speed relative to the belt. If you stand still on the belt, you still move through the airport because the belt itself is moving under you. If you walk against the belt, your net motion can even be zero. Now imagine that instead of carrying you through a building, the moving walkway carries you through a pattern in phi. The pattern itself might be drifting, like the belt. And on top of that, you're choosing your own motion. The combined effect is what you actually feel. D phi is like the net effect of the belt plus your walking, but written for the phase field. Omega is like the belt speed in time at your point. K is like the way the pattern lies across space. D phi is the result when you put those two together and ask, what do I really experience along this net motion? There is another everyday situation like this, listening to music in a car. Imagine that outside the car, along the road, there are speakers playing a song, each one slightly out of sync in time and slightly different in volume. If you stand still near one speaker, you hear the song changing in time at that spot. That is like omega. If you could somehow freeze time but still move from speaker to speaker, you would hear how the sound changes in space. That is like K. But what you actually do is sit in the car and drive. As you drive, you are moving through this landscape of sound while the song is also changing in time. Maybe you drive fast, maybe slowly. The music you experience along your trip is a combined effect of where you are and when you are there. If you drove the same road at a different speed, you would hear the song in a different way along the journey, even though the pattern of speakers and the timing of the song stayed the same. That difference between journeys is exactly what d phi keeps track of at the phase level. The scientific word for this kind of thing is directional derivative. A derivative is a measure of change. A directional derivative says, change along that specific direction of motion. When physicists write d phi, they are talking precisely about a directional derivative of phi along your path in spacetime. We hide the technical details in the papers so that here we can talk in stories. But it really is that direct. You choose a direction of motion, and d phi tells you how phi changes in that direction. There is a nice way to see this with drawing. Imagine a big sheet of paper where you have drawn a pattern of wavy lines, like a fingerprint. The lines represent equal values of phi. Somewhere on this paper, you draw a little arrow that shows how you are going to move. The question, what is d phi along this arrow, is really the question, as I follow this arrow, how quickly do I cross those fingerprint lines? If you move nearly parallel to the lines, you cross them slowly, and d phi is small. If you move straight across the lines, you cross them quickly, and d phi is large. If you somehow manage to move exactly along one line without ever leaving it, you never cross any, and d phi is zero. That is all d phi is, a way of translating the picture of lines and arrows into a precise statement about change, so that we can then plug that statement into equations and test it in real experiments. Let me briefly mention those experiments again, because Holophase is not a private belief system. It is a proposal about how nature might actually work, and that means it must be willing to be wrong. In the formal Holophase Codex, which I have written over many years and uploaded to Zenodo as a set of more than 30 scientific papers, d phi appears over and over again in the heart of the equations. Whenever we ask, how does this telephase change along a path, d phi is there. Whenever we ask, what paths does nature prefer, d phi is there. These papers are public, not hidden. Anyone, including the harshest critic, can open them, follow the steps, and ask, is this consistent? Does it match known data? Does it make new predictions? If the answer is no, the holophase model must be changed or thrown away. That is what falsifiability means. Here in the audio journey, we are doing something different but connected. We are giving your mind a new set of tools, a new language, so that if one day you do look at those equations, they will feel like another layer of a story you already know, not like alien symbols dropped from the sky. DeFi, in that sense, is not only a technical object, it is a way for you to think about your own life as a path through a changing pattern. One final image, very personal and very simple. Think of a day when you felt that everything flowed. Maybe you were drawing, or coding, or cooking, or walking with a friend, and hours passed without strain. You were moving through time and space, but it felt as if you and the situation fit together, like a key in a lock. In Holophase language, we would say, along that path, the way you moved was unusually well aligned with the underlying phase pattern around you. You were riding the pattern instead of fighting it. In later parts, when we talk about V, the velocity that rides the pattern, even the path, we can find the pattern. Let us end this part with a gentle reflection. We often feel torn between time and space in our lives. We say, I do not have enough time, or I am stuck in this place. But actually, every real experience you ever have is a flow through both at once. Your life is a path, a curve, drawn in the invisible spacetime of the universe. Along that path, something deep and simple is always true. The underlying phase field is changing. DeFi is the name we give to that change, written in the language of Holophase. Even if you forget all the analogies, remember this. Whenever you move, whenever anything moves, there is a way of talking about how the fundamental pattern is changing along that movement. That way of talking is DeFi. It is the first letter of spacetime in the alphabet of reality. Salam and peace be upon you as we close this simplified version 2 of part 14 of episode 6. In the next part, we will use DeFi to understand motion itself, V, as the special way of moving that lets you ride the phase pattern instead of being crossed by it. There, the idea of change along your path will become the key that unlocks the deep, testable unity of time, space, and motion in the Holophase language.